In this program, Joseph discusses the call of the hero, a theme which he explored throughout his career, most notably in his classic book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. The hero's journey, as he termed it, is of course reflected in ancient myths from around the world, and provides the background for Joseph's famous admonition, "Follow your bliss," as well as his more subtle, less well-known observation, "The insecure way is really the secure way." This conversation took place in the fall of 1984, when Joseph was 80 years of age. We began with a quotation from The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and a question about the origins of the call of the hero as a mythic theme. Often in actual life, and not infrequently in myths and popular tales, we encounter the dull case of the call unanswered, for it is always possible to turn the ear to other interests. Refusal of the summons converts the adventure into its negative. Walled in boredom, hard work, or culture, the subject loses the power of significant affirmative action and becomes a victim to be saved. His flowering world becomes a wasteland of dry stones, and his life feels meaningless, even though, like King Minos, he may through titanic effort succeed in building an empire of renown. Whatever house he builds, it will be a house of death, a labyrinth of cyclopean walls to hide from him his minotaur. All he can do is create new problems for himself and await the gradual approach of his disintegration. These are the words of Joseph Campbell from his classic work, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. In this age of the religion of materialism, the politics of expediency, and the glorification of greed, there continues to be the still, small voice of the call, the silent, unsung plea within each of us, to give up one's conditioned view of the world and follow the visionary adventure of the creative hero. This is the true challenge of contemporary times. Joseph, when did the call first appear in mythology?
In mythology, as the essence of mythology, I would say, the theme of the visionary quest, the one who goes to follow a vision, it appears in practically every mythology I know, one way or another.
So it's like the core genesis of all myth.
Yes, because it is the one who has gone on the adventure and brought back the message, who is the founder of institutions and the giver of life and vitality to his community.
You know, later in that chapter in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which was entitled Refusal of the Call, you talked about how we often follow society, and with the call, the reverse really is what's appropriate.
There are two ways of living a mythologically grounded life, and one is just to what I call the way of the village compound, where you remain within the sphere of your people. That can be a very strong and powerful and noble life. There are, however, people who feel this isn't the whole story. And today, you see, when all historical circumstances are changing, and we no longer have enclosing horizons that shut us away from the knowledge even of other people, when new worlds are breaking in on us all the time, it's inevitable that a person with any sense of openness to new experience will feel, no, this won't do the way we're living. Do you see what I mean? And so one goes out for oneself to find a broader base, a broader relationship. On the other hand, there's plenty of reason for those who don't have this feeling to remain within the field, because our societies are today so rich, you know, in the gifts that they can render. However, if a person has had the sense of what I, in that chapter, called the call, you know, the feeling of there's an adventure for me, and if he doesn't follow that, but that man remains in the society or the in group, only for practical reasons, because this is safe, this is secure, life dries up. And then he comes to that condition which I heard about a few years ago, a definition of late middle age, when you've got to the top of the ladder and found it's against the wrong wall. Now, I taught school in a boys' prep school for 1 year. That was a rough time, I tell you. It's all matters of discipline. But I think there's a critical time in a young man's life. That's when new ideas begin to open up, new possibilities of life. And then Dad is saying, well, I wish you'd study law, which is secure, and none of this fooling around. And I had young men who'd ask me, do you think I can write? Do you think I can write? I could be a writer? I say, do you think you could stand 10 years of not making it? If one has the guts, you might say, to follow the risk, life opens up all along the line. I'm not superstitious, but I do believe in spiritual magic, you might say. I feel if one follows what I call his bliss, the thing that really gets you deep in the gut and that you feel is your life, doors will open up. They do. And they have in my life, and they have in many lives that I know. There will be no program out ahead of you because nobody's ever done this before. But you'd be surprised if you're on your way, it'll open up. And the other point is, if you follow your bliss, you will have your bliss, whether you have money or not. If you follow money, you may lose the money, and then you don't even have that. The secure way is really the insecure way. And the way in which the richness of the quest builds up. Now, here I am well along in life, and it's still building up, Michael. I tell you, it's terrific.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to getting older. I listen to you, Joseph, and you make it so positive.
Well, that old story of Browning's, wasn't it? Rabbi Ben Ezra, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be.
You're mentioning the idea of the real security is in having no security. Calls to mind that we live in a society, as I mentioned in the introduction, a religion of materialism that really stresses the importance of so-called materialistic security. And I'm wondering, and when one looks at other cultures and other mythologies, whether this idea of security has always been present, or is this a phenomena based on 20th century industrial technology progress?
Well, I think the emphasis in our world is there because we have so much of it. Life is made pretty secure for us, so much so that we forget what the dangers of life really are. We even have insurance, even have life insurance, and all of this.
Paradoxical.
There's no risk, and it's inevitable that would become a heavy, But on the other hand, there are so many examples of people today who have adventured the adventure. Wonderful people. And they are, you might say, counter statements to this emphasis that of the popular mind on security. Tenure in the professions, and all that kind of thing.
In a sense, it's the going for the jumping over the edge and moving into the adventure that really catalyzes the creativity, isn't it?
I would say so. You don't have creativity otherwise.
Otherwise, there's no fire. You're just following somebody else's rules.
Well, my wife is a dancer, and she has had dance companies for many, many years. And I don't know whether I should talk about this, but when the young people are really adventuring it, it's amazing what guts they have and what meager lives they can be living, and yet the richness of the action in the studio. Then you're going to have a concert season. They all have to join a union. And as soon as they join the union, their character changes. There are certain rules of how many hours a day you can rehearse. There are certain rules of how many weeks of rehearsing. They bring this down like a sledgehammer on the whole thing. And then there are two mentalities. There's the mentality of security, of money, and there's the mentality of the open risk, you know. What this comes to is the conflict of the art, creative art, and economic security. And I don't think I've seen it in other cultures. The artist doesn't have to buck against quite the odds that he has to buck against today.
The artist is honored in other cultures.
He is honored.
Yes.
And quickly honored. Here,
it's a struggle. Non-profit organizations and the whole route of the struggle.
Or you might just hit it off, something that really strikes the need and requirements of the day, and then you've given your gift early, you know. But basically, it's a real risk. And I think that's so in any adventure. Even in business, the man who has the idea of a new kind of gift to society, you know, and he's willing to risk it. And then the workers come in and claim that they're the ones that did it, you know, and he can't afford even to perform his performance. It's a conflict, I think, between the security and the creativity idea. The entrepreneur is a creator. He's running a risk.
Maybe in American capitalistic society, the entrepreneur is the creative hero in some sense.
Well, I think he is. I mean, the real one. Most people go into economic activities not for risk, but for security. Do you see what I mean? And
sure.
The other psychology tends to take over.
Joseph, in that same chapter on the call and the hero with 1,000 faces, you wrote, "The myths and folk tales of the whole world make clear that the refusal of the call is essentially a refusal to give up what one takes to be one's own interest." And then you go on to say about how we get fixed in our own security and our own ideals and are reluctant to see them change.
Yeah, and it can even get so that you can't make them change.
And it brings up the whole connection of myth to the adventure
yes.
we've been talking about.
Yes.
I'd like to hear you talk about that.
Well, the myths, there is a kind of regular morphology and inevitable sequence of experiences if you start out to follow your adventure. I don't care whether it's in economics, in art, or just in play. The sense of potentialities and these opening out before you. And you have no idea how to achieve them. You start out into the dark, and then strange little helpmates come along, represented frequently by little fairy spirits or little gnomes or something like this that gives you just a clue, and this opens out. And then the sense of dangers you always run into, really deep perils, because no one has gone this way before. And the winds blow, and you're in a forest of darkness and terror very often, and then hanging on through that and all. It's something when I wrote that was 40 years ago. I was writing out of what I had read, you know, and now I've lived it. And I know it's correct. In fact, I was greatly moved by my own writing when you were reading that. I thought, gee, did I write that? That's how it turned out. I mean, it's valid. These mythic clues work.
Part of that, too, and this is interesting because this is a quote that one normally doesn't hear at the podium on Sundays in the average Christian church, and that is, dread the passage of Jesus, for he does not return. What does that passage mean to you in the context of what we've been talking about?
Jesus represents the inspiration to life. I mean, the life of the spirit, the life not simply of physical conditions, but the thing that is life for man, namely a spiritual adventure. And he comes and is the awakener. And if you close your mind to that awakener, you may not come back again. You can lose it. I think there are many myths, many epic stories of the awakening which then has passed, and you can't even think what it was. You can't think what it was. There's an extremely interesting psychological story of a woman in the hills of West Virginia, a mining area, who, when she was a little girl, walking through the woods, heard a wonderful music. And when she got home, she forgot what it was. Now, this is a woman in her late 60s who felt that she had missed her life. And it was only while in psychoanalysis that it came out that that song that she had heard was the call. Now, this, curiously, is precisely the problem of the shaman, the young person who is alone on the seashore or in the forest and hears a music. Now, those people have the knowledge that that music must somehow be followed. You must stay with it. And it may make a lonely life for you, but that is your life. And this, to me, was a very interesting thing. I'm sure that in our world where all emphasis is put on success and all of that, that song is heard and forgotten by young people. That's the missing of the call. Beware the passing of Jesus, for he may not return.
Does the call only occur when you're young?
Oh, no. But it first occurs when you're young. Do you know that lovely poem of Wordsworth on recollections of immortality, intimations of immortality? Birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that comes with us, it's come from God, and all this kind of thing. And he tells then of the prison house beginning to close upon the growing boy, but we can still hear the children singing on the seashore, But it may get closed down. On the other hand, if you stay open, you not only hear the song, but you hear it in greater symphonic composition as you go on. And then you know that you're still on the track.
What does contemporary religion have to do with the adventure? Anything?
I think contemporary religion's in a very bad spot. And it's because they have taken the symbols as the reference. And, for instance, the symbol, I'm speaking it now, religion is a constellation of metaphors. And a metaphor points to connotations that are of the spirit, not of history. And in our religions, we're accenting the historical image that carries the message, but we stay with the image.
So the literal interpretation of words.
Yeah, and you lose these messages. The thing about Jesus is not that he died and was resurrected, but that his death and resurrection must tell us something about our own spirit.
Why do you think that we do tend to this literal interpretation of the words? Why does that occur?
I think it's the result of a strong institutional emphasis in our religions in the West and a fear of the mystical experience. In fact, the experience of the divine within you is regarded as blasphemy, you see. I remember having given a lecture once on this problem of becoming transparent to transcendence, so that your life becomes, as it were, a transparency through which some kind of light shines. And I spoke of it as the God in you coming out through your life. And a couple of months later, I met a young woman at another talk of some kind, and she said, "Oh, I was at that lecture you gave on this subject, and I was sitting beside a priest, and when you said the Christ in you asks you to live in that sense, he said that's heresy. That's blasphemy." Blasphemy was the word that he used. Okay, so all the spirit is out there somewhere, not in you. What's the meaning of the saying, the kingdom of heaven is within you? If you can't say it's within me, then who's in heaven?
And I and the Father are one.
Well, all of that.
Sure.
Well, Jesus was crucified because he said, I and the Father are one.
We see the Great Flood through a lot of the histories of many peoples around the world.
The whole thing about that great flood is quite a puzzle. When they began investigating the actual date lines of flooding levels in Mesopotamia, they were found to be different date lines for different cities. So there's no cosmic flood, you see. The flood motif is also a mythological idea. The whole notion that all originates from water, and all is going back to water, the end, gives you a cycle. Out of water, back to water. Out of water, back to water. And each new cosmic eon, each new world age is, as it were, a creation out of water and a dissolution into water, so that it's a mythological motif. It's also a psychological motif. When you go to sleep, into deep dreamless sleep, it's as though you had gone into the sea of night, and then you come out in the day. Local floods then become associated in people's associational imagination with this mythological, psychological flood. The mythological floods are found in practically every people of the world. All along the equatorial belt, up in the north, the American Indians on the Great Plains were, there are many, many flood stories there. And I've just run into a rather amusing context, one that I've known for a long time. The flood has come, and on a raft is Old Man, or the trickster hero, with a bunch of little animals. And to recreate the world, he sends them down to bring mud up from the bottom. 2 or 3 of them die on the way, and finally, let's say the muskrat comes up with a little bit of mud in his hand, and he then puts it on the water. Old Man puts it on the water, pronounces magical words, and the world is brought into being. Now, that story, this that I've given with Old Man, is from the Blackfeet Indians. Throughout the plains areas, you find variants of this. Then you jump over to Siberia, and there it is there. And when you get to areas close to old Russia, Christian Orthodox, East Orthodox Russia, you find the man on the raft is Christ, and the diver is the devil. He sends the devil down to get it. And when he takes the mud out of the devil's mouth, the devil holds some mud in his mouth. And Christ makes it a nice smooth earth, and then the devil spits the mud out, and those are the mountains, and so forth and so on. So there is a flood myth that runs all the way from Central Asia or Western Asia to the American plains. And quite a different flood story, that, from the ones that you'll find, let's say, in Australia or the Tasmanian Islands or the world of Pygmy Africa.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of the feeling level and that psyche level. How in our culture we're trained to suppress that, to repress that, to oppress that, as it were. And part of that, I think, revolves around that we've somehow lost our rituals. The ritual was the place where other societies expressed their feelings. We don't have rituals anymore.
It's really astonishing how little ritual we have in our life. Even the rituals of courtesy have gone out. But the function of a ritual, a mythologically grounded ritual, is to engage you in experiencing the myth. A ritual is the enactment of a myth, either in a very literal way or in an extremely abstract way. The ritual of the sacrifice of the Mass in the Roman Catholic Church is the reenactment of the crucifixion. So you're participating in the sense of the crucifixion. And what the sense of the crucifixion is twofold. One, that the divine transcendent has come into the world and has accepted the crucifixion of life. And the other is that the individual has yielded his individual self and being to the grace of a transpersonal realization. So the cross is, as it were, the threshold of the passage of eternity into time and of time into eternity. And in participating in this, you are giving yourself to the Christ. And what the Christ is the Christ in us, namely the knower of the Father. And so understanding it in terms of its what may be called mythological or spiritual sense opens the image. And then it doesn't matter, whether Christ lived or not. Actually, there's no doubt about it that Jesus lived, that he was crucified, that he died and was buried. But it is a little more questionable as to whether he rose again and ascended to heaven. That doesn't matter. That's the mythological statement of the implication of giving yourself. He who loses his life shall find it, is this sense. And that's what we call the creative act, not hanging on, but yielding to the new creative yielding moment.